If you enjoy stories that feel real, touch your heart, and leave you thinking long after they end, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Mr. Wisdom Stories. The basement smelled of wet cardboard, old wood, and the faint sourness left behind by standing water. Amaris stood beside an open storage box, holding an envelope that should not have been in her hands. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were 2 words. For Marlowe. Cordelia stared at it for several seconds. Neither woman spoke. Then Cordelia stepped closer. "You need to keep quiet about that letter," she said, her voice low. "You have no idea what it would do to this family." Amaris looked down at the envelope again. For Marlowe. The name was written clearly. Not hers, not Cordelia's, her husband's. "How long have you had this?" Cordelia's mouth tightened. "Amaris, give it to me." "That isn't what I asked. It's old." "I can see that. Then leave it alone." Amaris slowly looked up. The water had been cleared from most of the basement, but the concrete floor was still damp beneath their shoes. Cordelia had spent years telling Marlowe what belonged where, what should be saved, what should be thrown away. Yet here, inside an old leather briefcase, was a letter addressed to her son, and Cordelia looked less surprised than terrified. "How long?" Amaris asked again. Cordelia didn't answer. Then the front door opened upstairs. Both women froze. A moment later, footsteps crossed the hallway. "Mama, Marlowe called you down here." Cordelia's eyes moved to Amaris. Amaris did not move. Marlowe came down the basement stairs and stopped. His wife was holding an old envelope. His mother stood several feet away, rigid and silent. The air between them told him enough to know he had walked into something he was not supposed to hear. His eyes moved to Amaris, then to Cordelia, then back again. Cordelia looked at Amaris first. That was what unsettled him. Not fear, not confusion, calculation. For most of his life, Marlowe had defended his mother with the same tired explanation whenever anyone complained about her. "That's just how she talks." When Cordelia corrected people, that was just how she talked. When she pushed too hard, that was just how she talked. When she decided what everyone else should do before asking what they wanted, that was just how she talked. But now Marlowe was looking at his mother, and wondering whether there had been more behind those words than he had ever allowed himself to see. "What letter?" he asked a 3rd time. Amaris finally turned the envelope toward him. Marlowe's face changed, because he recognized the handwriting. He crossed the room and took it from her carefully. His father had been dead for 13 years. But Marlowe knew those uneven letters. He had seen them on birthday cards, Christmas notes, grocery lists. For a moment, he simply stared. Then his thumb brushed across the torn edge. The envelope had already been opened. Marlowe slowly lifted his eyes. "You read this?" Cordelia swallowed. "Yes." "Welcome to Mr. Wisdom Stories. Fictional stories about human choices, unexpected turns, and the things we sometimes learn too late. Let's begin. What would you do if the person you trusted most asked your spouse to keep something from you? And what if that secret was not new? What if it had been waiting quietly for 13 years? If you believe the truth can be painful but still necessary, take a moment to like this story and leave a comment below. It helps YouTube share stories like this with more people who enjoy meaningful, emotionally layered storytelling. Because at that moment, Marlowe still did not know what was inside the letter, but suddenly that was not the only question. His mother had hidden something addressed to him. She had opened it, read it, and somehow decided that for 13 years he did not deserve to know it existed. So before we find out what the letter said, we have to go back to the beginning, back to Savannah, back to the marriage that looked peaceful from the outside, back to the small things Amaris noticed before Marlowe ever did, and back to the years when Cordelia began believing that protecting her family and controlling what they knew were the same thing. The question was no longer what was inside the letter. The question was why Cordelia decided Marlowe should never see it. Marlowe made coffee like he was trying to punish it. Amaris had told him that more than once. On a warm Savannah morning, she stood in the kitchen doorway with one hand resting on the frame and watched him pour a cup. "That is not coffee," she said. "That is a personal attack." Marlowe glanced over his shoulder. "You say that every morning." "Because every morning you ignore me." "I do not ignore you." "You have ignored me for 3 years." He handed her the mug anyway. Amaris took one sip and made a face. Marlowe smiled. "Still bad?" "Terrible. Yet you keep drinking it." "That says more about me than I'd like to admit." He laughed and turned toward the counter to make his own breakfast. That was how most of their mornings went. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would look impressive from the outside. 3 years into marriage, they knew too much about each other to pretend ordinary life was always romantic. Marlowe left cabinet doors open. Amaris moved his shoes out of the hallway and then complained when he asked where they had gone. He watched the same old movies whenever he could not sleep. She opened windows whenever the savannah weather allowed it. Even when Marlowe complained about pollen, their disagreements usually ended without speeches. Sometimes one of them apologized. Sometimes neither did. They simply got tired of being annoyed. That morning, Amaris crossed the kitchen and pushed open the window above the sink. Marlowe immediately looked up. "There you go. It's nice outside. It's going to be 90 degrees by noon." "It is not 90 degrees now." "It will be." Amaris leaned against the counter. "You argue with weather forecasts like they insulted your family." "My family has better judgment." She looked at him. Marlowe caught himself and laughed. "Okay," he said. "That one was easy." "Very." Cordelia came up often in small ways, not because Marlowe spent every conversation talking about his mother, but she was woven into his habits. He called her every Sunday. He still used recipes she had taught him when he was young. When something broke, he often remembered the way she used to fix it herself before deciding whether he could do the same. Marlowe's father had died when Marlowe was young enough to still need a parent for almost everything, and old enough to understand that life had changed. Cordelia had raised him alone after that. At least that was how Marlowe always described it. She did what she had to do. He had said those words to Amaris before, many times, and Amaris understood why. Cordelia had worked hard. She had kept the family in the same Savannah house. She had made sure Marlowe finished school. She had never allowed him to feel, at least not openly, that the family was falling apart after his father died. Marlowe remembered her sacrifices. He remembered the loyalty. He also remembered that whenever he was sick, Cordelia slept lightly so she could hear him if he called. Those memories mattered to him. But Amaris had memories of her own, smaller ones. Cordelia correcting how she folded a napkin. Cordelia telling Marlowe that his shirt looked better when Amaris had not chosen it. Cordelia asking Amaris whether she was sure before almost every decision that differed from her own. None of it was serious enough on its own. That was what made it difficult. A few weeks earlier, Cordelia had told Marlowe not to park near a certain section of her driveway. Amaris had asked why. Cordelia had said, "Because that is where I prefer him to park." Marlowe had laughed. "That's just how she talks," he said. Amaris had let it go. She usually did. Not because she never noticed, because she knew what Cordelia meant to him. That morning, Marlowe checked the time and grabbed his keys. "I need to go. You said that 10 minutes ago, and yet I'm still here. Another flaw in your time management system." He walked over, kissed her forehead, then stopped halfway toward the door. "My mother called last night." Amaris looked up. "Everything okay?" "She said something about a pipe." "What kind of something?" "The kind where she says it's nothing, which usually means I'll be buying something before the week is over." Amaris smiled. "Did you call her back?" "I told her I'd check on her after work." His phone rang. Marlowe looked at the screen. Cordelia. Amaris raised an eyebrow. "Perfect timing." Marlowe answered. At first he listened, then his expression changed. "Wait, slow down." Amaris watched him turn toward the window. "No, don't go downstairs again. I'm serious." A pause. "How much water?" Another pause. Marlowe rubbed his forehead. "I'm at work." Amaris held out her hand. He covered the phone. "Basement flooded. How badly? I don't know. Give me the phone." Marlowe did. Amaris lifted it to her ear. "Cordelia?" A beat passed. "Yes, I'm here." Amaris listened. Then she said, "I can come over." Marlowe looked at her. She continued listening. "I'll bring towels and see what we can do until Marlowe gets there." For the first time, Cordelia did not answer immediately. The hesitation was brief, but Amaris noticed it. Then Cordelia said, "All right." Amaris lowered the phone slowly. Marlowe reached for his keys again. "You don't have to deal with this." "She's your mother." "That is exactly why I said you don't have to deal with this." Amaris smiled faintly. "Go to work, I'll see what's going on." Marlowe nodded. Neither of them knew that by the end of that day Cordelia's basement would no longer contain only water, and the brief hesitation before she agreed to let Amaris come over would mean far more than either of them understood. Amaris arrived at Cordelia's house just before noon with 2 large towels over one arm and a plastic bag containing gloves, trash bags, and a small bucket in the other. The brick house looked the way it always did from the street, orderly, quiet. The front steps had been swept. The shutters were straight. Nothing about the place suggested that water had been spreading through the basement for most of the morning. Cordelia opened the door before Amaris knocked. "You got here quickly. You sounded like you needed help." "I said the pipe was leaking. Marlowe said the basement was flooding." Cordelia gave her a look. "Marlowe exaggerates." Amaris stepped inside. "That must be where he learned it." Cordelia's mouth moved slightly, as if she wanted to object, but she turned and walked toward the hallway instead. "Downstairs." Amaris followed. The basement steps were narrow and older than they looked. As she descended, the smell reached her first: wet cardboard, damp wood, and water that had been sitting too long. When she reached the bottom, she stopped. Marlowe was right. Cordelia folded her arms. "It looks worse than it is." Water covered part of the concrete floor, not deep, but enough to soak the lower edges of several boxes that had been placed directly against the wall. Amaris immediately put down the supplies. "Did you turn the water off?" "Yes." "Did you call anyone?" "I can call someone." "Cordelia." "What?" Amaris looked at her. "You know that is not what I asked." For a second, Cordelia looked as though she might argue. Then she sighed. "No." "Why not?" "Because I wanted to see if I could handle it first." Amaris pulled on a pair of gloves. "Of course you did." Cordelia watched her. "What does that mean?" "It means you're 70, 62. "Fine. You're 62 and you have a flooded basement." "I am aware of my age and my basement." Amaris almost smiled. This was familiar territory between them. Cordelia disliked being told she needed help. Amaris disliked watching her turn every request for help into a personal insult. After 3 years of marriage, they had learned how to work around the problem. Mostly. Amaris began moving the nearest boxes away from the wet area. Cordelia joined her. For several minutes, neither spoke. The basement was crowded with things Cordelia had apparently decided might someday become useful. Old holiday decorations, stacks of magazines, furniture covered in sheets, boxes sealed with yellowing tape. Amaris lifted one and felt the bottom soften in her hands. "Cordelia." "What?" "This one is ruined. Set it over there. It's falling apart. Then be careful." Amaris looked at her. Cordelia pointed toward a dry section of the floor. "Over there." Amaris carried it where she was told. As they worked, she began noticing how difficult it was to move through the basement. There was no open space because every area had been claimed by something. Not because Cordelia was careless. The opposite, really. Everything had been kept. Sorted. Stored. Protected from being thrown away. Amaris had seen enough of Cordelia to understand that she did not part easily with objects once they became connected to a memory. A chair became something Marlowe's father had once repaired. A box became something that might still contain an important paper. An old decoration became something too sentimental to discard. Cordelia was not someone who forgot the past. She kept it, even when she did not want to talk about it. Amaris was carrying a small box toward the stairs when she heard Cordelia move something behind her. The sound was quick, almost too quick. Amaris turned. Cordelia was standing beside a stack of plastic storage containers. "What?" Amaris frowned. "What did you move?" "Nothing. I heard something. You heard a box." Amaris glanced past her. One container had been shifted away from the wall. Behind it sat an open cardboard box. Cordelia immediately stepped in front of it. That caught Amaris's attention more than the box itself. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. You look nervous." "I am standing in a basement with a plumbing problem." "That is not what I meant." Cordelia's expression hardened. "Then say what you mean." Amaris set the small box down. "I asked if you were okay, and I answered you." Amaris held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Fine." Cordelia bent toward the open box. Amaris watched her close the lid. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was what made the moment strange. Cordelia had simply reacted too quickly. Amaris turned back toward the wet area and continued working. A few minutes later, she noticed something else. Near the wall stood an old leather briefcase. It looked different from the rest of the stored items. Older, more worn. Amaris had seen it before, years ago, in the corner of a closet upstairs. Marlowe had once told her it belonged to his father. She walked toward it. Cordelia's voice came immediately. "Leave that." Amaris stopped. She looked over her shoulder. "What?" "I said leave that. It's getting wet. I'll move it." Amaris glanced down. The bottom of the briefcase was already damp. "Cordelia, it's sitting near the water." "I heard you." but she did not move. Amaris stepped closer. Cordelia's voice sharpened. "Amaris, I'm only trying to help. I said I'll handle it." Something in the way she said it made Amaris pause. Not because she was afraid of Cordelia, because Cordelia sounded frightened. Amaris looked down again. The briefcase had fallen partly open. She had not touched it. The old clasp had apparently come loose. Inside were papers, some folders, and beneath them an envelope. Amaris could see only part of it, but one word was clear: Marlowe. She bent down before she could stop herself. Cordelia moved, too late. Amaris lifted the envelope. It was old. The paper had darkened around the edges. Across the front, in handwriting Amaris did not recognize, were the words, "For Marlowe the basement became completely still." Amaris looked at Cordelia. Cordelia was no longer pretending to be annoyed. Her face had changed. Amaris looked back at the envelope, then at her mother-in-law again. "Did you know this was here?" Cordelia did not answer. And in that silence, Amaris understood something that made her grip on the envelope tighten. Cordelia had not forgotten the letter. She had made a choice. Amaris kept the envelope in her hand. Cordelia stared at it as if the paper itself had become dangerous. "Give me that." Amaris did not move. "Cordelia, I asked you a question. And I told you to give it to me. No, you didn't answer me." "I don't need to answer every question you ask." Amaris looked at the envelope again. The handwriting was faded but clear. "For Marlowe." She turned it slightly toward Cordelia. "Did you know this was here?" Cordelia's jaw tightened. "It's an old letter. That isn't what I asked. It belongs to the past. And Marlowe belongs to the present." For a moment Cordelia said nothing. Water dripped somewhere near the back wall. Amaris could hear it. Slow, steady. Cordelia stepped closer and held out her hand. "Give it to me." Amaris looked at her hand, then at her face. "You knew about this." Cordelia's eyes hardened. "Amaris, you knew? Give me the letter." Amaris felt her patience begin to disappear. "Marlowe's name is on it, and you have no idea what is inside." "Neither do you." Cordelia stopped. It was only a second, but it was enough. Amaris looked more closely at the envelope. The seal was broken, not damaged, opened. Her eyes returned to Cordelia. "You read it." Cordelia lowered her hand. "Give me the letter. You read it." "I said—" "I heard what you said." The words came out sharper than Amaris intended. Both women became quiet. Cordelia looked away first. Amaris had known her long enough to recognize what that meant. Not surrender. Calculation. Cordelia was deciding which version of the truth would cost her the least. Amaris hated that realization, because she had spent 3 years trying not to be the wife who complained about her husband's mother. She had ignored comments, smiled through corrections, let Marlowe explain things away. But this was different. This was not a disagreement about dinner, furniture, or where Marlowe should park his car. This was a letter addressed to him. A letter his mother had apparently opened and hidden. "How long have you had it?" Cordelia looked at her. "You need to put that down." "How long?" "Amaris, how long?" Cordelia's shoulders rose with a slow breath. Then she said, "Long enough." Amaris stared at her. "That is your answer?" "It is the only answer I'm giving you." Something in Amaris changed then. Not anger exactly, certainty. Whatever had happened before she found that envelope, Cordelia had known about it. Maybe she had meant to tell Marlowe once. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she had never planned to tell him. But Amaris was no longer willing to pretend this was an innocent mistake. She slipped the letter beneath her arm. Cordelia's face changed. "Do not do that. I'm taking it upstairs. You are not taking it anywhere. It belongs to Marlowe. You don't know that. His name is written on it. You don't know why it was written." Amaris almost laughed. "You cannot seriously be saying that." "I am saying you do not understand what you are involving yourself in. Then explain it." Cordelia said nothing. Amaris waited. Still nothing. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. Cordelia stepped closer again. This time her voice dropped. "You need to keep quiet about that letter. You have no idea what it would do to this family." Amaris felt the words settle heavily between them. "What would it do?" Cordelia looked at the floor, then back at her. "That is not your concern." Amaris shook her head slowly. "It became my concern when you asked me to hide something from my husband. I did not ask you to hide anything. You told me to keep quiet. Because you are going to make trouble where there does not need to be any." "Trouble? Yes. Marlowe finding out his own letter exists is trouble." Cordelia's voice rose. "You do not know everything." "No." Amaris said. Because apparently you decided he shouldn't know everything. The words landed harder than she expected. Cordelia's face tightened. For the first time, Amaris saw something underneath the anger. Fear. Real fear. Not fear of Amaris. Fear of what would happen if Marlowe knew. And for one brief moment, Amaris wondered if there was something inside the letter that would destroy him. Something his father had written because he could not bring himself to say it while alive. Something Cordelia believed she had protected Marlowe from. Then Amaris remembered the broken seal, the 13 years implied by the age of the envelope, and the fact that Cordelia had allowed her son to live his life without ever knowing. You had years, Amaris said quietly. Cordelia looked away. That was when the front door opened upstairs. Both women froze. A man's voice carried through the house. Mama? Amaris looked toward the basement stairs. Cordelia's face went pale. Marlowe. His footsteps moved across the hallway. You down here? Cordelia whispered. Do not say anything. Amaris stared at her. Marlowe reached the top of the basement stairs. Why is the door open? Cordelia took one step toward Amaris. Give me the letter. Amaris stepped back. Then Marlowe started down the stairs. He appeared halfway between the basement and the first floor, one hand resting against the railing. He stopped. His eyes moved to Amaris, then to the envelope, then to Cordelia. Neither woman spoke. Marlowe came down the remaining steps slowly. What's going on? Cordelia forced a smile. Nothing. Amaris said nothing. Marlowe looked at the envelope again. What letter? Silence. He frowned. I asked you a question. Cordelia looked at Amaris. That was the moment Marlowe noticed something was wrong. Not because his mother seemed confused, because she seemed prepared, as if she were waiting to see what Amaris would do. And suddenly, Marlowe heard the last words Cordelia had spoken before he came downstairs. Keep quiet about that letter. He looked at his mother, then at his wife. His voice became quieter. What letter? Neither woman answered. Marlowe held out his hand. Give me the letter. Amaris looked at him for only a moment before placing it in his palm. The basement was quiet except for the faint sound of water dripping somewhere behind the storage boxes. Marlowe lowered his eyes. The envelope was older than he had first realized. The edges had darkened with time, and the paper had softened in places. Across the front, the handwriting pulled something loose inside him before he could stop it. He knew it. He had not seen it in 13 years, but he knew it. His father had written with a slight forward slant, pressing harder whenever he was in a hurry. Marlowe remembered seeing those letters on birthday cards, folded notes, even the labels on boxes his father kept in the garage. His thumb moved over the words, for Marlowe. His face changed. Amaris saw it. Cordelia saw it too. Marlowe turned the envelope over. Then he stopped. The seal was broken. He looked at his mother. You opened this? Cordelia did not answer. Mama! Her eyes lowered. Yes. Amaris shifted slightly beside him. Marlowe stared at Cordelia as if he had not understood her. You read it? Yes. The answer came quietly. That made it worse. Marlowe looked back at the envelope. Why? Cordelia folded her arms. It was not supposed to be found like this. That is not what I asked. His voice was still controlled, but Amaris knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. Cordelia heard it too. I found it years ago. How many years? Cordelia hesitated. Marlowe slowly lifted his eyes. How many? Before your father died. The words seemed to settle between them. Amaris looked at Marlowe. He did not move. You found this before he died? Yes. And you kept it? Cordelia nodded once. Marlowe's grip tightened around the envelope. Died 13 years ago. I know. You had this for 13 years? Cordelia's face hardened slightly. It was not as simple as that. Marlowe gave a short, humorless breath. It seems very simple from where I'm standing. Marlowe, you had a letter addressed to me. Cordelia said nothing. You opened it. Her silence continued. You read it? Yes. And then you decided not to give it to me. Cordelia looked directly at him. I believed you had suffered enough. The answer stopped him. For a moment, Marlowe looked almost younger, not because he believed her, because part of him recognized the woman who had spent years deciding what pain he could handle. After his father died, Cordelia had taken over everything. Paperwork, bills, funeral decisions, phone calls. She had told Marlowe where to sit, when to eat, when to rest. At the time, he had been grateful. Now he was standing in her basement, wondering how many decisions she had continued making after he was old enough to make them himself. You believed I had suffered enough, he repeated. Yes. So you decided I shouldn't know what my own father wrote to me? Cordelia's eyes filled, but Marlowe did not soften. I was trying to protect you. From what? Cordelia looked at the letter. That is exactly why you should not open it. Marlowe stared at her. Amaris spoke before the silence could turn into something else. Cordelia, he has the right to decide that. Cordelia turned immediately. This is between my son and me. Amaris nodded. Yes. Then stop interfering. Marlowe looked at Amaris. Cordelia continued. If you had not come here. No. Marlowe's voice cut through hers. Cordelia stopped. Marlowe stepped slightly toward Amaris. Don't do that. Cordelia's face changed. Do what? Blame her. I am not blaming her. You just said this was between you and me because she interfered. She found something she should have left alone. She found a letter with my name on it. She did not understand what she was touching. Marlowe looked down at the envelope again, then back at his mother. Neither did I. Cordelia's expression tightened. And apparently that was the point. The words struck harder than Marlowe intended. Amaris remained silent. Marlowe looked around the basement, at the boxes, the old furniture, the papers Cordelia had kept for years. His eyes returned to her. How many things have you decided I didn't need to know? Cordelia's mouth opened, then closed. Marlowe waited. No answer came. He looked at the envelope again. Marlowe, please. His mother's voice was different now, not commanding, afraid. Please don't open that. He closed his eyes briefly. For 13 years, the letter had existed somewhere inside this house while he visited every week. He had eaten at his mother's table, celebrated holidays with her, listened to her complain about his choices, defended her when Amaris quietly suggested that Cordelia sometimes crossed lines, and all that time, Cordelia had known something his father wanted him to have, something she had read, something she had hidden. Marlowe looked at his mother. I'm opening it. Then, despite Cordelia's whispered plea for him to stop, he slid one finger beneath the broken edge of the envelope and pulled the folded pages free. Marlowe unfolded the first page. His eyes moved across the opening lines once, then again. Amaris watched his face. What is it? She asked quietly. He did not answer. Cordelia stepped forward. Marlowe, you do not have to read it here. He looked at her. Where should I read it? She had no answer. So he returned to the page. The handwriting was harder to read in places, as if his father had paused often or written while tired. Marlowe read silently. Then his expression changed. What does he mean by this? Cordelia closed her eyes. Amaris looked from one to the other. Marlowe lifted the page slightly. He says he left us with debt. Cordelia said nothing. Mama, it was complicated. Was he in debt? Yes. The answer came so quickly that Marlowe looked almost offended by it. Yes? Cordelia's voice tightened. Yes. How much? I don't remember exactly. Marlowe stared at her. You don't remember? I remember enough. Then tell me. Cordelia looked away. The basement suddenly felt smaller. Amaris did not speak. She understood that this was no longer about her discovery. The letter had changed hands. What happened next belonged to Marlowe and Cordelia. Finally, Cordelia said, Your father had problems with his work. What problems? He took on jobs that did not pay when they were supposed to. Marlowe frowned. What does that mean? It means people owed him money. So bills did not stop because his clients delayed paying him. Marlowe looked back at the letter. His father had worked as a contractor for most of Marlowe's childhood. Marlowe remembered him leaving before sunrise with tools in the truck and returning home dusty, tired, and usually talking about the next project. He had always thought work was steady. His father had made it look that way. He writes that a client never paid. Cordelia nodded. One of them didn't. And? Cordelia laughed once without humor. And that was enough. Marlowe lowered the letter. One client not paying was enough to destroy everything? No. Her answer came sharper this time. No, it was never just one thing. Marlowe waited. Cordelia looked around the basement as though she had spent years trying to keep this conversation buried inside the same walls. Payments were already coming in late. Your father had materials to buy. Workers expected to be paid. We had the house, the truck, everything. Marlowe said nothing. Cordelia continued. Then the work became slower. Why didn't he tell me? You were young. I wasn't that young. No, but you were young enough. Marlowe's jaw tightened. Apparently everybody gets to decide that except me. Cordelia flinched. Amaris looked at Marlowe. He knew what he had said, but he did not take it back. He looked down and kept reading. The next paragraph mentioned illness. His face tightened again. What illness? Cordelia was silent. Marlowe looked up. What illness? Your father was sick. I know he was sick. He died. Marlowe, what was wrong with him before that? Cordelia pressed her lips together. He was already struggling. With what? His health. That is not an answer. He was tired. Marlowe gave her a look. Everybody gets tired. Cordelia looked at him. He was tired all the time. The words came out softer. And he kept working anyway. Marlowe read another line, then another. His father had written about not knowing how to stop, not knowing which problem to solve first, not knowing how to tell Marlowe that the family was not as secure as it appeared. Marlowe's eyes moved quickly now. Then he stopped. He says you took over the money. Cordelia's shoulders dropped. Yes. When? When things got worse. Why? Because somebody had to. Marlowe lowered the page. There it was again. The answer that seemed to explain everything and nothing. Somebody had to. Cordelia continued before he could interrupt. Your father was still trying to work his way out of it. Every time money came in, there was somewhere else it had to go. He would tell me the next job would fix things. And did it? No. The word sat heavily in the room. So you took over? Yes. What did that mean? It meant I started calling people, looking at bills, figuring out what we could pay. Marlowe looked at the letter. And borrowing? Cordelia went still. Amaris noticed. Marlowe noticed too. What borrowing? Cordelia looked away. He found the next paragraph. His father had written it plainly. We borrowed money to cover money we already owed. Marlowe read the sentence twice. Then he looked at Cordelia. You borrowed? We did. Who did? We both agreed to it. But you were handling the finances. Yes. So you found the loans. Some of them. And the others, your father did. The answer surprised him. For a moment, Marlowe said nothing. He had wanted the story to become simpler. He wanted one person to have made the decisions and the other to have suffered from them. But the letter would not give him that. Neither would Cordelia. His father had known about some of the borrowing. Cordelia had known about some of his decisions. Both had apparently continued believing that the next payment, the next project, the next loan would finally give them enough room to breathe. Then another job failed to pay. Another bill arrived. Another decision was delayed. Marlowe looked toward the ceiling. So the house was part of this too? Cordelia did not answer. He returned his eyes to her. Mama. Yes. Was the house part of this? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. Amaris felt Marlowe shift beside her. He had grown up in this house. Cordelia had kept him there after his father died. It was one of the sacrifices he had always remembered most clearly. Now he was learning that the house itself had once been part of the financial struggle. How close? Cordelia looked at him. What? How close did we come to losing it? The question remained between them. Cordelia did not answer. Marlowe looked back at the pages. His father had written more. And as Marlowe reached the next page, he realized the letter had not yet told him the worst of what his parents had been living through. He turned the paper over and kept reading. Marlowe turned the page. This time, he did not begin reading immediately. His father's handwriting covered nearly every line, but the words near the top caught his attention before anything else. I should have told you sooner. Marlowe read the sentence once. Then he read it again. Cordelia watched him. Amaris stood quietly beside him. The next line was worse. Your mother knows some of this already, and I know she may believe keeping it from you is the kinder choice. Marlowe slowly lowered the page. Cordelia's face changed. He looked directly at her. You knew he thought you might hide this from me? Cordelia's lips parted. Marlowe, you knew? He was worried about everything. That is not what I asked. Cordelia looked away, and Marlowe understood before she answered. Yes, she said. His grip tightened. For several seconds he could not find anything to say. His father had worried about Cordelia hiding the truth. Cordelia had read those words. And still, after his father died, she had kept the letter. Marlowe looked down again. There was more. I am not writing this so you will hate her. His throat tightened. He continued. Your mother was frightened, and so was I. We made different mistakes, but neither of us knew how to stop what we had started. Marlowe read more slowly. His father admitted that he had avoided the bills because opening them made the problems feel real. He admitted that when Cordelia tried to take control, he sometimes stepped back because part of him was relieved that someone else was making decisions. Marlowe stopped. There it was. His father had not simply been a victim. Cordelia had not simply taken over his life. He had let her carry parts of the burden because he was overwhelmed, and Cordelia had taken more control because someone had to make decisions. But somewhere along the way, decisions had become secrecy, and secrecy had become habit. Then Marlowe reached another line. "If she tells you I should have said this to you myself, she is right. I should have." Marlowe's eyes moved to the next sentence. "But if she tells you there was no reason for you to know, then she is wrong." He stopped breathing for a moment. Cordelia whispered, "Don't." Marlowe looked at her. "What? Don't read it like that." "Like what?" "Like it was written to put you against me." He stared at her. "Mama, it says right here that he didn't want me to hate you." "I know." "Then why are you still trying to tell me how to read my own father's words?" Cordelia's face tightened. Amaris looked down. Marlowe returned to the letter. The final section was shorter. His father wrote that Marlowe had been old enough to understand more than either parent had allowed. He admitted that the truth would hurt, but wrote that pain was not always the worst thing a family could give someone. Sometimes, he wrote, the worst thing was leaving a person with questions and letting them believe the silence meant there had never been anything to ask. Marlowe swallowed. Then he reached the final message. "I need you to know what happened, even if you are angry with both of us. You deserve that much." He lowered the letter. Cordelia had tears in her eyes. "I was ashamed," she said. Marlowe did not answer. She wiped at her face. "I was ashamed of what happened to us. Ashamed that we borrowed money. Ashamed that I didn't know how bad it was until it was already bad. Ashamed that after I took over, I made mistakes too." Her voice broke slightly. "One decision created another problem. Then fixing that problem created another one." Marlowe listened. "I thought if I kept going I could clean it up, and did you? Some of it. And the rest?" Cordelia looked at the floor. "I didn't know how to tell you." Marlowe laughed once quietly. "That was 13 years ago. I know. You had 13 years to figure out how to tell me. I know. Every birthday?" Cordelia closed her eyes. "Yes." "Every Sunday when I came here?" "Yes." "Every holiday?" Her shoulders fell. "Yes." Marlowe looked away from her. That was what hurt most. Not only that she had hidden the letter, she had lived with the decision, protected it, returned to it again and again. There had been hundreds of moments when she could have walked into his life with the envelope and said, "I need to tell you something." She had not. Amaris finally spoke. "Cordelia, you didn't just hide it once." Cordelia looked at her. Amaris continued carefully. "You kept protecting the choice to hide it." Cordelia said nothing. Marlowe closed his eyes. The words were simple, but they explained why this felt larger than one letter. Every year had been another decision, every visit, every conversation, every time Cordelia saw him and said nothing. Marlowe folded the pages carefully. His hands were shaking now, though only slightly. "I need to leave." Cordelia looked up. "Marlowe, I need to get out of here. Please don't leave like this." He looked at her. "How else am I supposed to leave?" Cordelia had no answer. Amaris moved toward the stairs with him. Marlowe stopped at the bottom step and looked back one last time. "I don't know what to do with this." Cordelia stood among the boxes and damp cardboard, looking smaller than she had when the confrontation began. "You don't have to decide today," she said. Marlowe nodded, but his expression made it clear that deciding was not the only problem. Outside, Savannah's heat wrapped around them the moment they stepped through the front door. Amaris walked beside him toward the car. Neither spoke until Marlowe reached the passenger side. Then he stopped. He looked down at the folded letter in his hand. "I don't know who I'm angrier with." Amaris remained quiet. Marlowe looked back toward Cordelia's house. His father had written the truth too late. His mother had hidden it too long. And somewhere between those two failures was the family story Marlowe had spent most of his life believing. He opened the car door but did not get in. Because the letter had answered some questions, it had also created others. Questions about the debt, questions about the house, questions about how much his father had known, and questions about how much Cordelia had still not told him. Marlowe looked at the envelope again. Then he got into the car with Amaris beside him, and for the first time in 13 years he carried his father's words home. That night, Marlowe put the letter in his nightstand. He did not put it away because he was finished with it. He put it there because he did not know where else to put it. The kitchen table felt wrong. The desk felt too deliberate. Leaving it on the counter felt careless. So after dinner, after washing the plate he had barely eaten from, after sitting beside Amaris through half of a television program neither of them was following, he carried the folded pages into the bedroom and opened the drawer beside his side of the bed. He placed the letter inside. Then he closed the drawer. The next morning he went to work. He came home, they ate dinner, he watched television, he went to bed. And before turning off the light, Marlowe opened the nightstand again. The letter was still there. The following evening, he did the same thing. Amaris noticed on the third night when Marlowe stood beside the bed longer than necessary. She noticed when he pulled the drawer open but did not remove the envelope. And she noticed when he finally closed it and lay down without saying a word. But she did not ask him what he was thinking, not because she was uninterested, because she knew the difference between silence that needed to be challenged and silence that needed room. Several days passed. Marlowe went through his routine as if repetition could restore something. He left for work in the morning. He came home in the evening. He made coffee too strong. Amaris opened the windows when the weather allowed. Once, she did it while he was standing beside the sink. He looked at her. She looked back. "Don't start." "I didn't say anything. You were thinking something." "I was thinking the house needed air. It has air." "That explains your coffee." Marlowe almost smiled. Almost. The moment passed quickly. Amaris did not try to bring it back. Later that night, they sat in the living room with the television playing quietly. Marlowe was holding the remote, but had not changed the channel in nearly half an hour. Amaris looked over at him. "You want to talk?" He kept his eyes on the television. "No." "Okay." Another minute passed, then another. Finally, Marlowe said, "Do you think people can remember someone incorrectly?" Amaris turned toward him. He was still looking ahead. "What do you mean?" "My father." The room became quiet. Marlowe leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "I remember him as calm." Amaris listened. Not perfect, just... He searched for the word. "Steady." His voice softened. "If something went wrong, I remember him fixing it, or at least acting like he knew what to do." He laughed once without amusement. "Now I read that letter and I find out he was drowning in debt." Amaris did not interrupt. "He was sick, he was scared, he was avoiding bills." Marlowe looked down at his hands. "And I didn't know. You were his son. I was old enough to notice something. Maybe, but noticing something is different from knowing what it means." Marlowe considered that. Then he shook his head. "They both protected me." Amaris said nothing. "That is what Mama keeps saying. She was protecting me, but he did it too." His eyes moved toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. "The difference is he wrote me the truth." Amaris felt the weight in his voice. Marlowe leaned back. "I keep thinking about all the things I believed because nobody corrected me. His childhood home, his father's work, the years after his father died, the sacrifices Cordelia had made. None of those memories were false, but they were incomplete. And Marlowe was beginning to understand that incomplete memories could still shape a person's entire life. "I thought I knew my family," he said. Amaris reached for his hand. "You knew the family they let you see." He looked at her. The words did not comfort him, but they made sense. That was almost worse. Marlowe glanced at the clock. Sunday was approaching. For years he had called Cordelia every Sunday. Sometimes the calls lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 40, but they happened. It was one of those habits that had become so ordinary he had never questioned it. Now he looked at his phone sitting on the table. Amaris followed his eyes. "You don't have to call her." Marlowe nodded slowly. "I know." Choice easier. For 13 years he had believed Cordelia had given him everything she had. Now Sunday was coming, and for the first time in his life, Marlowe did not know whether he could pick up the phone. Sunday came anyway. Marlowe knew that before he opened his eyes. Not because anything felt different in the room, but because his body had learned the rhythm of the day years ago. Sunday meant calling Cordelia. It meant checking in, listening to whatever she wanted to complain about, and eventually hearing her ask whether Amaris was eating enough. For the first time, the routine felt like a decision. His phone sat on the kitchen counter. He looked at it while his coffee cooled beside him. Amaris was near the sink, quiet enough that he knew she was deliberately giving him space. Finally, Marlowe picked up the phone. He called. Cordelia answered on the second ring. "Hello? Mama?" A pause. "Hello, Marlowe. How are you?" "Fine." He closed his eyes. "I'm fine too." Another pause. They had both said the word. Neither believed it. For several minutes they discussed nothing important. The weather, work, the plumber who had finally looked at the basement pipe. Cordelia mentioned that the basement had dried out. Marlowe said, "Good." Then the conversation stopped moving. He stared through the kitchen window. "Mama, I can't do this." Cordelia went quiet. "Do what?" "This." "Marlo, no. I'm trying to have a normal conversation with you and I can't." He heard her breathe. "I know you're angry." "I am. I said I was sorry. You said you were ashamed." "That too." Marlo leaned against the counter. "What were you truly afraid of?" Cordelia did not answer immediately. He waited. "You've read the letter," she finally said, "and I know you still haven't told me everything." Silence. "Mama, there was more debt." Marlo's face hardened. "More?" "Yes. You said you and Dad borrowed money." "We did." "Then what aren't you telling me?" Cordelia sounded tired. "After your father died, there was one loan left." Marlo straightened. "One loan?" "A personal loan." His grip tightened around the phone. "How much?" "I don't remember the exact amount now." "You remember enough." Cordelia said nothing. The words sounded familiar. Too familiar. Marlo closed his eyes. "Who did you borrow it from?" "I don't want to discuss that over the phone." "Why?" "Because I don't." He almost laughed. "Mama, do you hear yourself?" "Yes." "You spent 13 years deciding what I could know, and now you're doing it again." "I am trying to explain." "Then explain." Cordelia exhaled. The loan had remained after Marlo's father died. It was not from a bank. It had been taken when the family was already behind on other payments, after one of his father's work projects failed to bring in the money they had expected. Cordelia had hoped to settle it quickly. She had not. "What happened to it?" Marlo asked. "I paid it." "When?" "Years later." "And you never told me?" "No." He looked down. "Where is the agreement?" Cordelia became quiet again. "Mama, why do you want it?" "Because I want to understand what happened." "You read the letter." "The letter didn't explain everything." "No," she admitted. "It didn't." Marlo waited. Finally, Cordelia told him where she had kept the old agreement, not because she wanted him to find it, because she seemed to understand that refusing again would only repeat the same mistake. The next morning, Marlo took a day off work. He went alone. He did not tell Amaris where he was going until he had already decided. "I'll be back later," he said. She looked at him. "Okay." That was all. No warning. No demand to know what he expected to find. Marlo spent most of the morning looking through records connected to the years he had never fully understood. And what he found disappointed him. There was no hidden fortune, no dramatic betrayal waiting behind the paperwork, no crime, no stranger who had secretly controlled his family. Just paper, bills, missed payments, work that had been completed but not paid on time, money borrowed to cover money already owed, his father's illness, his parents' fear, their avoidance, and then more debt. By the time Marlo found the loan agreement, he was sitting alone, staring at figures that had once seemed large enough to swallow his family's future. But the document was not the final surprise. Another record was attached to it, a receipt, then another. Marlo read them carefully. The remaining balance had been paid, years after his father died, paid in full by Cordelia. Marlo sat back slowly. For years his mother had carried that debt without telling him. And for the first time since finding the letter, Marlo understood something that made his anger more complicated. Cordelia had hidden the truth, but she had also spent years trying to pay for it. Marlo did not call Cordelia after finding the payment records. He wanted to. More than once, he picked up his phone and put it down again. The documents were still sitting on the passenger seat when he drove away. He had expected to find something that would make his anger cleaner, something undeniable, something he could point to and say, "There, that is where you failed us." Instead, he found another complication. Cordelia had paid the remaining debt herself. She had carried it for years after his father died, quietly making payments while raising him and keeping him in the same house. Marlo understood why that mattered. He still did not understand why she had hidden it. By the time he reached her house, he had already decided he needed to ask her in person. Cordelia opened the door without surprise. She had been expecting him. "Come in." Marlo stepped past her. The house smelled like coffee and furniture polish. It looked exactly as it had when he was growing up. The same walls, the same hallway, the same rooms he had spent years believing he understood. Cordelia walked toward the kitchen. He followed. She sat at the table. Marlo remained standing. "You found it," she said. "The agreement." Cordelia nodded. "And the receipts." Another nod. Marlo pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. For a few seconds neither spoke. Finally he asked, Why didn't you tell me you paid it? Cordelia looked at him. What would you have done? The question irritated him immediately. I don't know. Exactly. Marlowe leaned back. That is not a reason. No? No, because I still should have been allowed to decide what I wanted to do. Cordelia looked down at her hands. You were trying to build your own life. So? So I did not want to drag you backward. You mean you didn't want to tell me? I mean I was trying to protect you. Marlowe closed his eyes briefly. There it is again. Cordelia's face tightened. What? Protect? I did protect you. Maybe you did sometimes. She looked at him. But you don't get to use that word for every decision you made without asking me. The kitchen became quiet. Cordelia looked toward the window. Marlowe knew he had hurt her. He also knew that hurting her was not the same thing as being wrong. You asked me what I would have done, he said. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I couldn't have helped. Maybe I would have been angry. Maybe I would have told you not to pay it. I honestly don't know. Cordelia turned back toward him. But I should have had the choice. Her eyes dropped again. Marlowe continued. Why did you keep going? After Dad died, after the debt was paid, after all those years. Why didn't you just tell me? Cordelia gave a tired smile. Because by then, what was I supposed to say? The truth. It was no longer just one truth. Marlowe waited. Cordelia looked around the kitchen. At first, I thought I would fix the problem and tell you when it was over. She paused. Then another problem came. Her fingers moved against the table. Then your father got worse. Then he died. Then I found myself handling everything alone. Marlowe listened. After that, I thought I needed to get the house safe first. Then I thought I needed to pay the remaining debt. Then I thought I needed to make sure you were all right. And when I became all right, Cordelia looked at him. Then I had waited too long. Marlowe said nothing. Do you understand? She asked. I understand the logic. Do you? Yes. Cordelia seemed almost relieved. Marlowe shook his head. But I reject what you did with it. The relief disappeared. He leaned forward. You kept waiting for the day when there would be nothing left to confess. Cordelia looked down. Marlowe continued. You thought if you fixed enough of it, the past would become less important. I thought I could spare you. Maybe that was true at first. Cordelia's eyes rose. But after a while it wasn't just about sparing me. She knew what he meant. Marlowe could see it. When did you realize you weren't going to tell me? Cordelia did not answer. Mama, I don't know. Yes, you do. Her voice became quieter. I think... She stopped. Marlowe waited. I think the first time I lied to you about something related to your father, I told myself it was temporary. He remained silent. The next time, it was easier. Marlowe looked away. Then eventually, Cordelia continued, telling you the truth meant admitting I had been lying. That is called a consequence, I know, and you still chose not to tell me. Yes. The answer sat between them. Cordelia did not defend herself. Not this time. Marlowe looked around the kitchen. He remembered sitting at this table as a boy, doing homework, eating meals, listening to his parents talk about ordinary things while apparently avoiding everything that frightened them. The house had survived. That much was true. Cordelia had kept it. She had paid what remained. She had given Marlowe the stability he always believed she had fought for. But stability built on silence had its own cost. Marlowe looked at her. So, when you found Dad's letter, Cordelia went still. You already knew what you were going to do. Her eyes filled. No, Marlowe waited. She shook her head. I knew what I was afraid to do. He considered that. Then he asked the question he had been circling since the basement. Was it fear? Cordelia did not answer immediately. Finally she said, Not only. Marlowe's expression changed. Cordelia looked directly at him. I was afraid of losing you. Her voice shook. But I was proud too. Marlowe said nothing. Cordelia swallowed. I did not want my son to look at me and see how badly I had failed. And for the first time, Marlowe understood that the letter had been hidden by more than fear. It had also been hidden by pride. Cordelia's last words remained between them. I did not want my son to look at me and see how badly I had failed. Marlowe sat quietly at the kitchen table. For most of his life, he had thought of his mother as the person who kept going when everyone else would have fallen apart. After his father died, Cordelia had been the one who answered calls, handled bills, made meals, and kept the house standing. Now Marlowe was seeing another side of that strength, the part that refused to admit when strength had turned into control. He looked at her. Did you ever think about giving me the letter? Cordelia's eyes lifted. What? The letter. Marlowe held her gaze. After you found it, after Dad died, after I got older. Cordelia's face changed. He waited. Every year, she said. The answer was so quiet that Marlowe almost asked her to repeat it. Instead he said, every year. She nodded. Every year. Marlowe leaned back. He looked toward the hallway, then at the kitchen that had changed and remained the same at the same time. Then what stopped you? Cordelia lowered her eyes. For once she did not answer immediately with fear. She did not say she was protecting him. She did not mention his father. She simply said, pride, mostly. Marlowe stared at her. Mostly? Yes. What else? Cordelia gave a tired breath. Shame, fear, habit. Habit. After enough years of keeping something to yourself, silence becomes easier than explanation. Marlowe understood that. He hated that he did. There had been no locked room, no complicated scheme, no extraordinary effort required to keep the letter from him. It had survived because Cordelia kept putting off one conversation, then another, until 13 years had passed. You could have mailed it to me, Marlowe said. I know. You could have brought it to my apartment. I know. You could have handed it to me any Sunday. Cordelia nodded. Yes. Marlowe looked down at the table. Every year. The words bothered him more than he expected, not because they proved Cordelia had forgotten. They proved the opposite. She remembered. She had remembered him every year and still decided not to tell him. Finally, Marlowe asked, do you expect me to forgive you? Cordelia looked up quickly. No. The answer came without hesitation. No? No. Marlowe studied her face. I would like you to, she said. Of course I would, but I don't expect you to. Why not? Cordelia's mouth tightened. Because I gave up the right to expect anything from you when I decided I knew better than you did. Marlowe looked away. The honesty did not make him feel better. It only made the room quieter. After a moment, Cordelia said, I didn't want you to hate me. There it was, not protection, not responsibility, the fear underneath everything else. Marlowe slowly turned back toward her. I don't hate you. Cordelia's face softened slightly. But I don't know what this is going to look like now. The softness disappeared. Marlowe continued. You're still my mother. None of this changes the years you raised me. It doesn't erase what you did for me. Cordelia listened without moving. But it changes how I understand some of it. Marlowe felt the truth of that as he said it. The house had not disappeared. His childhood had not become false. His father had not become a stranger. Cordelia had not suddenly become someone he had never known. But the shape of everything had changed. There were spaces in the story now, places where silence had been standing. I need time, Marlowe said. Cordelia nodded. How much? I don't know. Another silence followed. This one was different. No one was trying to escape it. No one was pretending there was nothing left to say. Marlowe stood from the table. Cordelia looked up at him. You're leaving? Yes. She nodded, though disappointment crossed her face before she could hide it. Marlowe walked toward the kitchen doorway. Then Cordelia spoke again. Are you coming back? He stopped. For years the answer would have been obvious. Of course he was coming back. He came back every Sunday, for holidays, for dinners, for small problems and ordinary conversations. Cordelia's house had always been part of the map of his life. Now he stood with one hand near the doorway, realizing that even a simple question could no longer have a simple answer. He looked back at her. Cordelia was still sitting at the kitchen table, waiting, not demanding, just waiting. Marlowe swallowed. I don't know. Then he walked out, leaving the answer behind them both. When Marlowe got home, Amaris was sitting on the couch. The television was on, but the sound was low. She looked up when the front door closed. Hey! Hey! That was all. Marlowe stood near the door for a moment, keys still in his hand. He had expected questions on the drive home. What did she say? Did you argue? Are you all right? Instead, Amaris gave him the space he had been asking for without saying so. He walked into the living room and sat beside her, not close enough to touch, not far enough to suggest distance. For several seconds they watched the television. Then Marlowe said, She admitted it. Amaris turned toward him. The pride? He nodded. And everything else? Amaris waited. She said she thought about giving me the letter every year. Amaris's expression changed. Every year? That's what she said. Marlowe leaned back. And somehow that made me angrier. I understand. She remembered. Amaris nodded. She had to decide not to tell me again every time she thought about it. Yes, Marlowe looked at her. You're agreeing with me too easily. Amaris gave him a small look. You're not wrong just because you're upset. He almost smiled. Almost. Then the expression disappeared. She admitted she was wrong. And I still don't feel better. Amaris nodded again. Marlowe rubbed his hands together. I thought I would. Why? Because isn't that what people want? An apology? Sometimes, he looked at her. But an apology doesn't return the years before it. Marlowe was quiet. Amaris continued. Forgiveness isn't pretending nothing happened. He stared at the floor. I know. No, I think you know it now. That's different. Marlowe gave her a tired look. Thank you for making that sound worse. I wasn't trying to. You were. Maybe a little. This time he smiled. Only briefly. Then he looked away again. Amaris watched him. You know something? She said. What? I didn't always understand that. Marlowe turned back toward her. Understand what? How you can love someone and still need distance from them. He said nothing. Amaris looked toward the dark television screen. I didn't talk to my mother for a long time. Marlowe frowned. You never told me that. I know. Why not? Because it wasn't about you. He waited. Amaris rested her hands together. We weren't close for a while. There were things I couldn't get past, and she didn't understand why I couldn't just move on because we were family. Marlowe listened carefully. Eventually we started speaking again. Did you forgive her? Amaris considered the question. Yes. Immediately. She looked at him. Do you know me at all? Marlowe let out a short laugh. It was the first real one he had managed in days. Amaris smiled. Eventually, she said. He looked down. What changed? I stopped thinking forgiveness meant I had to return to the exact relationship we had before. The words stayed with him. Amaris continued. Some relationships don't go back. Marlowe's expression became serious again. They go forward differently. He thought about Cordelia asking whether he was coming back. I don't know. The answer had felt cruel. Now he wondered whether it had simply been honest. Amaris leaned back. And before you say it, no, I am not telling you what to do. You were about to tell me what to do. No, you absolutely were. I was going to tell you what not to do. Marlowe looked at her. That sounds exactly the same. It is completely different. He smiled again. Then he became quiet. After a moment he said, You know what I realized? What? You were never trying to turn me against her. Amaris's face changed slightly. Marlowe continued. I kept thinking you just didn't understand, Mama. I understood some things. I know. You loved her. I still do. I know. Marlowe looked at her. But I kept translating things. Amaris waited. Every time she said something that hurt you, I told myself that's just how she talks. Amaris said nothing. Every time she crossed a line, I found a reason for it. He shook his head. I made everything harmless. The words came slowly, because they were difficult to admit. Amaris reached for his hand. I wasn't asking you to hate her. I know. I just wanted you to stop pretending something didn't hurt because you understood why she did it. Marlowe looked at her. That was the sentence he needed. Not because it told him what to do about Cordelia, because it explained what had happened between him and Amaris for years. He had mistaken understanding for acceptance. He had believed love required him to soften every painful truth until it no longer sounded painful. Amaris squeezed his hand. You can love your mother and still tell her no. Marlowe leaned back against the couch. That's a very annoying sentence. I know. Because it's true. I know. He looked at her. You enjoy this. A little. Marlowe laughed. This time he did not stop immediately. Amaris laughed too. It was not a solution. The letter was still in the nightstand. Cordelia was still his mother. 13 years had not disappeared. But for the first time since he found the envelope, Marlowe laughed without forcing himself. And for a few seconds that was enough. Cordelia called Amaris 3 days later. Amaris stared at the phone until the ringing stopped. Marlowe noticed from the kitchen. Who was it? My mother-in-law. He looked toward the phone. Are you going to call her back? Amaris picked it up. Yes. Marlowe said nothing. She called Cordelia that afternoon. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. I want to apologize to you, Cordelia said. Amaris sat at the edge of the couch. Okay, Cordelia hesitated. I don't know how to do this. You can start by saying what you're apologizing for. There was a pause. Then Cordelia said, I was wrong to ask you to keep the letter from Marlowe. Amaris waited. I put you in the middle. Yes, I shouldn't have done that. No, Cordelia exhaled. I thought you would make things worse. Amaris looked toward the window. I know. I thought if Marlowe knew he would blame me. He was going to be angry. I know. But that wasn't my decision to prevent. Cordelia said nothing. Amaris continued. What you asked me to do wasn't small, Cordelia. I know. You asked me to choose between protecting your secret and being honest with my husband. The words remained between them. Cordelia's voice became quieter. I know, and I need you to understand something. I do. You can't ask me to do that again. Cordelia did not respond immediately. Then she said, I won't. Amaris believed she meant it, but belief was not the same as trust. I appreciate the apology, Amaris said. Cordelia gave a small breath. That's all? What were you expecting? I don't know, Amaris almost smiled. I don't think either of us knows how this relationship is supposed to work now. Cordelia was quiet. Maybe it doesn't have to work the way it did before. That answer seemed to surprise her. When they ended the call, Amaris sat with the phone in her lap for several minutes. Marlowe came into the room. How did it go? She apologized. He nodded. And? I accepted that she apologized. Marlowe smiled slightly. That sounds very much like you. I didn't say everything was fine. I know. Amaris looked at him. I don't want your mother to become the villain in our marriage. Marlowe sat beside her. She already knows you're terrible. Amaris turned. What? I'm joking. You are terrible at joking. That is not what you said when I made you laugh 2 nights ago. You got lucky. Marlowe smiled. The conversation moved on. Not dramatically. There was no family meeting. No promise that everyone would now speak honestly forever. The changes came through smaller decisions. The following Sunday, Marlowe did not call Cordelia. He thought about it, then decided he did not want to. 2 days later, he called while driving home from work. Cordelia answered. Marlowe? Yeah. There was surprise in her voice. Everything okay? I had a question. What is it? Why do you keep buying that coffee I hate? Cordelia was silent. Then she said, You hate it? Yes. You've been drinking it for years. Because you kept serving it. I thought you liked it. I thought you knew I didn't. For a second, neither spoke. Then Cordelia said, Well, why didn't you say something? Marlowe pulled up at a red light. He almost laughed. Why do you think? Cordelia was quiet. Then, unexpectedly, she said, Fair enough. Marlowe stared through the windshield. The light changed. He drove forward. They talked for another few minutes. Nothing important, nothing historic. And when he hung up, Marlowe realized he had called because he wanted to. Not because it was Sunday. Not because the calendar had told him he was a son at that particular hour. Weeks passed. The relationship did not become easier overnight. Sometimes Cordelia said too much. Sometimes Marlowe ended a call early. Sometimes Amaris chose not to visit. No one pretended those choices were meaningless. Then, one afternoon, Marlowe and Cordelia argued about the house. He had stopped by to bring over something she had left in his car. Cordelia saw him looking at a loose cabinet handle. Don't touch that. Why? Because you're going to make it worse. I know how to tighten a handle. Not that one. It has one screw. You always say that before something breaks. Marlowe stared at her. I am not 12. I know that. Then stop talking to me like I am. Cordelia opened her mouth, then stopped. The old version of the conversation would have gone somewhere else. Marlowe would have become quiet. Cordelia would have insisted she was only trying to help. Then someone would have changed the subject. This time, Marlowe stayed where he was. Cordelia stayed where she was. Neither pretended nothing had happened. Finally, Cordelia said, I'm sorry, I was being difficult. Marlowe looked at her. Yes. She narrowed her eyes. You could have accepted the apology without enjoying it. I didn't say I was enjoying it. You look like you were. I did not. You did. Marlowe shook his head. You know what? Keep your broken cabinet. It isn't broken. It will be. You're impossible. He looked at her. So are you. Cordelia folded her arms. For 1 second, Amaris expected another silence. Instead, Cordelia said, You get that from your father. Marlowe stared at her. Then he laughed. Not because the argument was funny. Because Cordelia had disagreed with him, apologized, and then immediately disagreed with him again. And somehow, for the first time, nobody had tried to hide what was happening. Amaris watched them from the doorway. It was not warmth. Not yet. It was something more honest. They were finally learning that disagreement did not have to end in silence. Months passed before Marlowe did anything with the letter. Not because he forgot about it. He didn't. The envelope remained in his nightstand for weeks, then months. Sometimes he opened the drawer before bed and looked at it. Sometimes he read part of it again. Other times he closed the drawer without touching it. Eventually, Amaris asked him what he planned to do. Marlowe stood beside the bedroom dresser, holding the letter carefully. "I don't know. You don't have to decide today." "I know. That was part of the problem." For 13 years, Cordelia had decided what happened to the letter. Now the decision belonged to him, and Marlowe was beginning to understand that having control over something did not always mean knowing what to do with it. One Saturday morning, he took the letter to a professional archivist for preservation. He did not want it framed. He did not want a dramatic display case. He did not want it hanging somewhere in the house where every visitor could ask about it. He simply wanted to make sure it survived. The archivist handled the paper carefully and explained how age could continue damaging it if it was not properly stored. When he left, the letter remained temporarily behind. For a few hours, Marlowe felt strangely unsettled. It was not because he feared losing it. It was because he had carried it for so long without realizing that it had become something more than paper. The letter had once belonged to his father's private fear. Then it had belonged to Cordelia's silence. Now it belonged to him, not the story inside it. He could never own that. The debt had happened. The illness had happened. The mistakes belonged to the people who made them. But Marlowe could decide what his father's words meant to him. That mattered. His father was no longer the perfectly steady man Marlowe had remembered from childhood. But Marlowe did not want to punish his memory by replacing one simple version with another. His father had been frightened. He had avoided problems. He had allowed Cordelia to carry decisions he should have faced beside her. He had been weak in ways Marlowe had never known. He had also loved his son. Those things could exist in the same person. The realization stayed with Marlowe long after the preserved letter was returned to him. One evening, he and Amaris sat at the kitchen table after dinner. She was clearing plates while he remained seated. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "My father." Amaris paused. "Anything specific?" Marlowe considered it. "I used to think finding out the truth would ruin him for me." Amaris sat down. "And did it?" "No." He looked toward the window. "It changed him." "That isn't the same thing." "No." Marlowe thought about the words in the letter. His father's apology, his admission that he had avoided things, his request that Marlowe know the truth even if it made him angry. "I think I loved the version of him I remembered," Marlowe said, "and now I have to learn how to love the whole person." Amaris was quiet for a moment. "That sounds harder." "It is, but maybe more honest." Marlowe looked at her. "That's becoming your favorite word." "Honest? Apparently. Good word. Annoying word." Amaris smiled. A few days later, Marlowe picked up his phone. He called Cordelia. When she answered, her voice carried the same caution it had held for months. "Marlowe? Yeah. What happened?" "Nothing happened." Cordelia paused. "Then why are you calling?" Marlowe looked toward Amaris, who was sitting across the room. He said, "Dinner Thursday." Another pause. Cordelia seemed genuinely uncertain. "At your house?" "Yes. Is Amaris there?" Amaris looked up sharply. Marlowe covered the phone. "She wants to know if you live here." Amaris gave him a look. "Tell her I moved out." Marlowe smiled despite himself. Cordelia heard something in his voice. "What did she say?" "Thursday, 7. He ended the call before Cordelia could overthink the invitation. Then he set the phone down. Amaris raised an eyebrow. "You invited her?" "Yes." "Are you ready?" Marlowe considered the question. "No." Amaris nodded. "Okay." He looked at her. "That's it? You asked if I was ready?" "I didn't." "You were about to." Marlowe smiled. Amaris stood and returned to what she had been doing. Thursday was coming, and for the first time since the letter was found, Cordelia had been invited into their home, not because Marlowe felt obligated to maintain an old routine. He had invited her because, uncertain as he still was, he had decided he wanted to try something different. Thursday arrived with more tension than Marlowe expected. He had invited Cordelia 4 days earlier. Since then he had regretted it twice, forgotten about it once, and spent most of Thursday pretending it was an ordinary dinner. Amaris knew better. "You're cutting those wrong." Marlowe looked down at the vegetables. "They're vegetables. They're uneven. They're going to cook. That doesn't make them even." Marlowe lifted the knife. "You want to do it?" "No." "Then stop supervising me." "I wasn't supervising. You've been standing there for 5 minutes criticizing carrots." Amaris leaned against the counter. "They're not carrots." Marlowe looked down. She was right. He stared at the cutting board. Amaris waited. "Don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was thinking it." That counts. The doorbell rang. Marlowe stopped moving. Amaris looked at him. Still time to hide? Very helpful. You invited her. I remember. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked toward the front door. Cordelia stood outside holding a container. Marlowe opened the door wider. What is that? Cordelia looked down at it. Dessert. You brought dessert? Yes. Why? She frowned. Because I was invited to dinner. I know how invitations work. Then why are we discussing this? Marlowe stepped aside. Cordelia entered. Amaris appeared from the kitchen. Hi, Cordelia. Amaris. Their greeting was polite, not cold, but not pretending either. Cordelia held out the container. I brought dessert. Amaris took it. Thank you. I wasn't sure what you liked. That's unusual. Cordelia looked at her. Amaris smiled slightly. I mean, thank you. Cordelia almost smiled back. Marlowe returned to the kitchen. Dinner is nearly ready. Amaris looked toward the stove. No, it isn't. Marlowe stared at her. It is nearly ready. You haven't finished cooking anything. Details. Cordelia followed them into the kitchen. She looked at the vegetables, then at Marlowe. Did you cut those? Marlowe closed his eyes. Amaris immediately looked away, trying not to laugh. Yes. Cordelia stepped closer. Why are they all different sizes? Marlowe looked at Amaris. See? What? Nothing. Cordelia picked up one piece. This one is enormous. Put it down. And this one is barely a piece of anything. Put it down. Amaris laughed. Cordelia turned toward her. Did he learn to cook after he married you? Amaris answered carefully. He learned several things after he married me. Marlowe pointed the knife toward them. Both of you need to leave my kitchen. Cordelia raised an eyebrow. Your kitchen? Yes. You don't own the kitchen. I live here. So does Amaris. Marlowe looked at Amaris. Please remove my mother. Amaris laughed again. Cordelia looked at Marlowe. You're overcooking those. I haven't even put them in the pan. Exactly. For 1 second Marlowe stared at her, then he started laughing. Amaris covered her mouth. Cordelia tried to remain serious. She failed. The laugh came unexpectedly. Small at first, then real. Marlowe looked at his mother. Cordelia looked back at him. For a moment, nobody spoke. The past was still there. The letter. The 13 years. The arguments. The apologies. None of it had disappeared because Cordelia had made a comment about vegetables. Marlowe understood that. So did Amaris. So did Cordelia. But the silence that followed was not the old kind. Nobody rushed to fill it. Nobody acted as though laughter had solved anything. Eventually Amaris said, Can we eat before he burns something? I haven't burned anything. Cordelia looked at the stove. Yet. They moved to the table. Dinner was imperfect. Marlowe's vegetables were uneven. Cordelia said so twice. Amaris told her once was enough. Cordelia said it had not been enough the first time Marlowe threatened to order food. Amaris told him to stop making threats he would enjoy carrying out. The conversation wandered. Work, the weather, the house. At one point Cordelia began giving Marlowe advice about something he had not asked her about. He looked at her. She stopped. Then, after a brief pause, she said, Sorry. Marlowe nodded. Thank you. Neither of them smiled. They didn't need to. The boundary had been noticed and respected. Later, Cordelia asked Amaris whether she had liked the dessert. Amaris looked at the empty container. I think that answers your question. It might have been Marlowe. It wasn't. Cordelia looked at her son. I knew it. Marlowe leaned back. You're both very comfortable blaming me. You make it easy, Amaris said. Cordelia nodded. Exactly. This time Marlowe only shook his head. When dinner ended, Cordelia stood near the door while Amaris brought her container from the kitchen. You can keep that, Amaris said. Cordelia took it. Are you sure? Yes. You'll need something to return food in. Amaris looked at her. That sounded almost like a threat. Cordelia smiled slightly. Maybe. Marlowe opened the front door. Cordelia stepped outside. She turned toward him. Thank you for dinner. He nodded. You're welcome. There was no embrace, no dramatic promise. Cordelia looked toward Amaris. Good night. Good night. Then she walked toward her car. Marlowe and Amaris stood in the doorway until she drove away. Marlowe closed the door. For a moment he leaned against it. Amaris looked at him. You survived. Barely. She was on good behavior. Marlowe stared at her. That was good behavior? Amaris smiled. Exactly my point. He shook his head, but he was smiling too. The dinner had not fixed the family. It had not restored 13 years. It had not returned Marlowe to the person he had been before he found the letter. But Cordelia had come. They had eaten. They had argued about vegetables. They had corrected each other. They had laughed. And when something uncomfortable appeared, nobody had buried it beneath politeness. It was an imperfect dinner. For this family, that made it something worth remembering. After Cordelia left, Marlowe carried the dinner plates into the kitchen. Amaris followed with the glasses. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Water ran into the sink. Marlowe rolled up his sleeves and reached for the dish soap. Amaris handed him a plate. "You know," she said, "for someone who nearly lost a fight with vegetables, you look very confident around dishes. I've always been good at dishes." "That's because dishes don't require cutting." Marlowe looked at her. "I invited my mother here, and this is the support I get. You survived your mother, barely. You survived dinner, also barely." Amaris smiled and handed him another plate. The kitchen settled into the ordinary rhythm of washing and drying. Marlowe stood at the sink. Amaris dried the dishes and placed them away. It was the same kind of work they had done 100 times during their marriage. But Marlowe found himself thinking about how many ordinary moments were built around things people did not say. He looked through the window. Cordelia's car was gone. For a long time he said nothing. Then he spoke. "I used to think families fell apart when someone stopped loving someone." Amaris paused with a glass in her hand. Marlowe continued washing the plate. "Maybe that's true sometimes." She waited. "But I don't think that's the only thing." He turned off the water. Amaris looked at him. "I think people can love each other and still destroy something between them because they refuse to tell the truth." Amaris leaned against the counter. Marlowe looked down at the plate in his hands. "My father loved us." "Yes." "Mama loved us too." "Yes. And look what happened." Amaris did not rush to answer. That was one of the things Marlowe appreciated most about her. She did not always fill silence simply because it existed. Finally, she said, "Maybe that's why silence can be so dangerous in a family." Marlowe looked at her. "Because you think everything is fine? Sometimes." She placed the dried glass on the counter. "And sometimes you know something isn't fine, but everyone around you behaves as if naming it would make things worse." Marlowe nodded. His father had avoided bills because the problems frightened him. Cordelia had taken control because she was frightened too. Then Cordelia had hidden the letter because she feared what Marlowe would think. Different silences, different reasons, the same result. Years lost to things that might have hurt less if they had been faced sooner. "My father wrote the letter," Marlowe said. Amaris nodded. "He finally chose the truth." "Yes, too late to tell you himself." Marlowe considered that. "But not too late for you to know." He looked at her. The words stayed with him. The letter had not repaired anything. His father was still gone. 13 years were still gone. Cordelia could apologize for every year and still never return a single one. Marlowe knew that. Understanding it did not make him less angry. Forgiving Cordelia, if he eventually reached that point, would not make her decision disappear. And knowing his father had been frightened did not turn his father into a perfect man who deserved to be remembered without criticism. The truth had made everyone more complicated, but it had also made them real. Marlowe placed the last plate in the drying rack. "I don't know if I forgive her." Amaris nodded. "You don't have to know tonight." "I don't know if I'll ever completely trust her." "You don't have to promise that either." Marlowe looked toward the dining room where they had eaten together less than an hour earlier. "But I invited her." "Yes. Does that mean something?" Amaris smiled slightly. "It means you invited her to dinner." Marlowe gave her a look, very deep. "You married me for my wisdom?" "No, I married you despite it." Amaris laughed. Then her expression softened. "I think it means you were willing to sit with the truth without pretending the truth had never happened." Marlowe leaned against the counter. That felt closer to what he had been trying to understand. He did not want to return to the family they had been. He could not. That family had required him to translate his mother's behavior into something harmless. It had required Cordelia to believe silence could protect him. It had required everyone to avoid the things that frightened them. Marlowe did not want that peace again, because he finally understood that it had never been peace. It had only been quiet. Amaris picked up the towel. "That's the difference, isn't it?" "What? Silence and peace?" Marlowe looked at her. "Yes." He thought of Cordelia sitting at the kitchen table months earlier, her voice breaking when she admitted she had thought about giving him the letter every year. He thought of his father writing that Marlowe deserved the truth, even if it made him angry. He thought of the basement, The old briefcase. Amaris refusing to hide the envelope. One letter had forced all of them to stop pretending. Not immediately, not perfectly, but enough. Marlowe reached for Amaris's hand. She let him take it. "Do you think Mama knows that?" "Knows what? That silence isn't peace." Amaris considered it. "I think she's learning." Marlowe nodded. "Me too." They turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the bedroom. Later, Marlowe opened the nightstand drawer. The preserved letter rested inside a protective sleeve. He did not take it out. He simply looked at it for a moment. Then he closed the drawer. For 13 years, silence had been mistaken for protection. For months, Marlowe had mistaken anger for a problem that needed to disappear before he could move forward. Now he understood something different. Truth could create discomfort. It could change how people saw each other. It could expose weakness, pride, fear, and mistakes people had spent years trying to bury. But honest discomfort could also become the beginning of something healthier. Not because the truth repaired everything. Because once the truth was spoken, people finally had the freedom to decide what came next. Cordelia was still accountable for what she had done. Marlowe's father was still responsible for the choices he avoided. Marlowe was still learning how to be a son without surrendering his boundaries. And Amaris was still unwilling to carry secrets that belonged to someone else. Nothing about the family was perfect. Maybe it never had been. But now, when something hurt, they had begun to name it. When someone crossed a line, they could say so. When an apology was offered, it did not erase the past, but changed behavior could begin building something new. And perhaps that was the real difference between the family Marlowe had grown up in and the one he was learning to belong to now. The old family had survived by keeping painful things quiet. The new one would have to survive by facing them, because silence is not peace. Sometimes it is only the space where a truth has been waiting too long to be heard. Reflective close. A secret can begin with good intentions. Someone may believe they are preventing pain. They may believe they are protecting the people they love. But when the truth belongs to someone else, keeping it from them can slowly become another form of control. Understanding why someone made a harmful choice does not erase what that choice cost. Shame can explain a mistake without excusing it. Love and disappointment can live inside the same relationship. And forgiveness, when it comes, is not the same as pretending nothing happened. An apology may begin repair. Changed behavior is what makes trust possible again. Sometimes the healthiest boundary is not leaving forever. Sometimes it is returning differently. So if you discovered that someone you loved had hidden an important truth from you for years, would understanding why they did it make forgiveness easier? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story gave you something meaningful to think about, please like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Wisdom Stories for more fictional stories about human choices, unexpected turns, and the things we sometimes learn too late.